Why did the colonel do it? No one in the room could answer that, not then, not later. At a dinner meant to honor the best warriors the Navy had to offer, Colonel James Garrett, base commander of Naval Special Warfare Center San Diego, reached out and grabbed Dr. Margaret Dalton by the hair. He yanked her head back in front of 60 witnesses. Forks froze, conversations died. The chandelier light trembled across crystal glasses as every man and woman at the table realized what they were seeing, and that none of them could look away. The colonel's face was taut with fury. Hers was calm, composed, almost eerie in its restraint. When he released her, expecting a slap, a scream, something, she simply straightened her uniform blouse, fixed her glasses, and looked him dead in the eye. "Colonel," she said, her voice steady enough to cut glass, "request permission to participate in tomorrow's Hell Week demonstration." And then she sat down as if nothing had happened. The silence that followed felt like a pressure wave. Every SEAL in the room knew what Hell Week meant. 6 days of cold surf, exhaustion and pain designed to break the strongest of men. No one, no civilian, no woman, no psychologist, had ever volunteered to join it. That was the moment it began. Not a scandal. A reckoning. The next morning, the sun over Coronado burned through a white sky. Heat shimmered on the grinder, the legendary courtyard where generations of SEAL candidates had either earned their future or broken beneath it. Dr. Margaret Dalton stood at the edge, tablet in hand, watching 47 men shoulder telephone pole logs through the dust. Her hair, silver threaded through auburn, was pulled into a tight bun. She looked out of place among the sweat, the grit, the shouts, but nothing in her expression said she didn't belong. She wasn't observing strength. She was observing suffering, how it was given, how it was endured, and how it was taught. Senior Chief Colonel Brennan barked commands like gunfire. "Logs up, hold steady. Anyone drops that log, everyone pays." His voice was iron, stripped of compassion. The logs trembled on young shoulders. A recruit, Wells, 23, face red with effort, stumbled. The log dipped, threatening to roll off. "You're a liability, Wells," Brennan snapped. "Ring the bell now and save everyone the trouble." Wells's jaw tightened. He didn't drop the log. He found his footing, lifted again, eyes burning. Margaret noted everything. The words, the tone, the way the rest of the team reacted. This wasn't resilience training. This was survival by humiliation. Her stylus moved across the tablet. "Breaking compliance does not build warriors. It builds silence." "Dr. Dalton." The voice came from her right, gravelly, old but firm. She turned to see Master Chief Frank Campbell, 61 years old and built like a stone wall carved by time. "Observing suffering for your psychological notes?" he asked, half-smile tugging the corner of his mouth. She returned the faint smile. "Observing the methodology, Master Chief. Suffering, a given. The question is, does it build or destroy?" Campbell studied her quietly. His call sign was Ironside. Not for physical toughness, but for moral consistency, an endangered species in the Navy. "You've been here 3 days, he said. "Formed opinions already." "Observations," she corrected softly. "Opinions require more data." He glanced at her badge. Marine Corps psychologist, 2 tour in Fallujah, completed the crucible at 42. He nodded once. "Explains the spine." "Personal reasons brought you back?" he asked carefully. Her gaze didn't waver. "Personal reasons," she said. "Let's leave it there." The Master Chief studied her face and saw a flicker, pain, buried deep and disciplined. Then it was gone. "You'll find, Doctor, that this command doesn't much care for civilians telling them how to think," he said. "Then maybe," she replied quietly. "That's why they need someone who's not afraid to." The colonel appeared like a storm approaching. James Garrett, 58, broad-shouldered, medals gleaming on his chest, eyes the color of wet steel. The kind of man whose voice didn't rise because everyone was trained to lower theirs first. He crossed the grinder, heat waves bending around him, and the candidates stiffened automatically. Campbell saluted, Colonel on deck. Garrett's gaze landed on Margaret like a spotlight. Dr. Dalton, he said with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes, I've reviewed your proposed curriculum: resilience training, stress management, suicide prevention. He tested the last phrase like a foreign language. Interesting choice of priorities. They're evidence-based, Colonel, she replied, designed to improve operator survivability both on and off deployment. He tilted his head. Suicide prevention. We don't have suicide problems. We have warriors. They understand the mission. They adapt. With respect, sir, she said, naval special warfare has lost more SEALs to suicide than to combat in the last decade. The colonel's jaw tightened. Statistics, he said, compiled by people who have never been downrange. You can't teach toughness from behind a desk. Margaret's voice stayed steady. I wasn't behind a desk in Fallujah. I was treating Marines under fire. I've seen what happens when toughness becomes toxicity. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe resentment. He gave a tight nod. Your training begins next week. Attendance mandatory. Just remember, these aren't patients, doctor, they're warriors. Warriors, she said softly, are still human, Colonel. He turned away before she finished the sentence. That evening, Margaret stood in front of the mirror of her hotel room, adjusting her navy blazer. The invitation card lay on the desk, a formal command dinner, Colonel Garrett requesting her attendance as honored guest. Master Chief Campbell had laughed when she'd told him. It's not a welcome, he'd said. It's a display. He's putting you on parade to remind everyone who runs this place. She believed him, but she went anyway. At 1830, the Officers' Club glowed with soft golden light over the bay. White stucco walls, red-tiled roof, the architecture of peace masking an institution built for war. Everywhere she turned, uniforms, laughter, the clink of crystal and silver. Colonel Garrett held court at the head table, his wife beside him, elegance wrapped in obligation. Margaret kept her chin high as she moved through the crowd. She shook hands, smiled, took her seat among the junior officers, far from the head of the room. Distance, even here, was a message. Dinner unfolded with practiced civility. No one mentioned the earlier tension. No one mentioned suicide. No one mentioned anything real. Until dessert. The colonel rose, wine glass in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, tonight we welcome Dr. Margaret Dalton, our civilian expert in resilience and emotional management. Soft laughter rippled. She's here to help us understand the importance of talking about our feelings. After all, we've only been producing the world's most elite warriors for 60 years. Clearly, we've been doing it wrong. A few polite chuckles, mostly silence. Margaret's expression didn't change. Garrett continued, smiling like a man who already knew he'd won. I'm sure Dr. Dalton will remind us that, when facing the enemy, what we really need is a support group and some guided meditation. He set the glass down. Doctor, care to enlighten us? Margaret rose slowly. Her voice carried through the room, calm but sharp. With respect, Colonel, resilience isn't about softness. It's about survival. I'm not here to make SEALs weaker. I'm here to keep them alive when toughness alone stops working. The colonel's eyes narrowed. You suggesting our methods are insufficient? I'm suggesting physical endurance and mental endurance aren't the same thing, she replied, and the statistics prove it. The air went thin. He descended from the dais, steps deliberate, controlled. And what would you know of that, doctor? Tu tour as a Marine, sitting behind the wire while real warriors fought. She didn't flinch. I learned it from treating men who couldn't stop shaking even after the gunfire stopped. from holding the hand of one who put a bullet through his temple because he thought asking for help made him weak, from burying my son, Lieutenant David Dalton, SEAL Team 7, who served under your command. Gasps cut through the hall like shrapnel. Even Garrett froze. Her voice didn't break. He reached out for help 6 weeks before his suicide. The system ignored him. You ignored him. Enough, Garrett hissed, stepping closer. Your son made his choice. He made it, she said quietly, after his command punished vulnerability and called it discipline. Something in Garrett snapped. He lunged forward, grabbed her hair, and yanked. The room erupted, chairs scraping, shouts, the sound of disbelief crashing into outrage. In one smooth motion, she turned his wrist, leveraged his elbow, and freed herself without striking back. A precise, controlled technique that left him gasping from pain rather than humiliation. Let go, Colonel, she said. He did. Silence. 60 people watched the unthinkable. A colonel assaulting a civilian, and the civilian standing taller afterward. Master Chief Campbell moved fast, placing himself between them. Sir, he said quietly, this conversation's over. Garrett's breathing came rough, wild. He looked around, realizing what he'd done, and who had seen it. His wife's face was pale as porcelain. Officers stared, unsure which rule governed this moment. Finally, Garrett straightened his uniform. Dinner is concluded, he announced. Dr. Dalton is suspended pending investigation. Margaret didn't move. Put it in writing, Colonel. I want the specific grounds for suspension. You'll have your paperwork, he snapped. Campbell escorted her out into the night air. The ocean wind carried the faint taste of salt and freedom. You okay, Doc? He asked quietly. She nodded once. Fine, but the colonel just made the biggest mistake of his career. Campbell looked at her. You planned this. She opened her car door, eyes steady on the horizon. No, but I was ready for it. She paused before stepping inside. You asked me earlier if I was brave or foolish. The truth, I'm just a mother with nothing left to lose. As she drove away, the waves of Coronado crashed against the dark shoreline. Somewhere behind her, the institution began whispering, strategizing, deciding what story it would tell. But she already knew the truth. And this time, the truth wasn't going quietly. How far could one woman go to expose the truth? By dawn, the answer was already taking shape on the cold sands of Silver Strand Beach. The Pacific looked black before sunrise, a long, breathing animal waiting to test whoever stepped into it. Wind howled across the shoreline. Floodlights carved harsh cones of light into fog that clung to the ground like ghosts. This was the crucible where legends were made, and where, for the first time, a civilian woman was about to join them. Dr. Margaret Dalton stepped out of the mist wearing gray athletic gear. Her breath fogged in front of her. She carried nothing. No bag, no badge, no permission slip from command. Only purpose. Senior Chief Brennan spotted her first. Dr. Dalton, his voice snapped through the cold. You're not authorized to be here. Colonel Garrett suspended your access pending investigation. She stopped 20 meters away, calm as a drawn line. I submitted a formal request to volunteer for today's demonstration, she said. No written denial was received. Until one arrives, I'm here as a civilian engaging in physical training on public beach access. Brennan's jaw tightened. Don't play legal games with me, ma'am. The colonel's orders were clear. Then fetch those orders, she replied evenly. In writing, I'll wait. He blinked, thrown off by her poise and by the small crowd forming around them. Candidates, instructors, junior officers. The woman from last night's scandal was back, standing against the same machine that had tried to bury her overnight. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cross appeared beside Brennan, voice measured but uneasy. Doctor, your presence creates a problem. The colonel isn't here yet, said a third voice, older, gravelly, carrying authority born of decades. Master Chief Frank Campbell emerged from the fog like it was parting for him. His eyes met Margaret's, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I received your request," he said finally. "Colonel Garrett hasn't responded in writing. Until he does, I'm authorizing your participation as a civilian volunteer. You train at your own risk." Brennan scowled. "Master Chief." "We are on public property," Campbell interrupted quietly. "I'm not removing a civilian from a beach." Brennan knew a losing fight when he heard one. He turned away muttering, "Fine, no special treatment." "Wouldn't expect any," she answered. The candidates stared. The same woman who'd faced down their commanding officer now stood among them, lacing up her shoes beside men half her age, preparing to endure what they'd spent months dreading. "Boat Crew 3, Brennan called out. "You get the doctor." 6 young men shuffled, uncertain. One of them, Seaman Wells, the same recruit who had stumbled under the log the previous day, gave a hesitant nod. "Ma'am, no disrespect," he said quietly, "but this course breaks people, if it's too much." "Then you carry me," she said, voice steady. "Until then, keep pace." The whistle shrieked at 600. They sprinted across soft sand that swallowed every step. The young seals charged ahead like unleashed energy, kicking up clouds of grit. Margaret kept a steady rhythm, shorter strides, measured breathing, conserving energy instead of burning it. By the 50-meter mark, their explosive pace faltered. She was still running at the same cadence, catching up. She passed one, then another. When the first obstacle appeared, a 30-foot dune of loose sand, most attacked it like a wall, scrambling on hands and knees, slipping backward twice for every step forward. Margaret studied the surface, chose her path, and climbed with precision. Her movements looked almost lazy, but she reached the top nearly even with the fastest. The wind cut across the ridge. The sun hadn't yet risen above the horizon, and the light was blue and unforgiving. Down below, Brennan's voice echoed. "Next station, log carry." 6 men lifted a 200-pound telephone pole onto their shoulders. The youngest grunted under the strain. Sweat and sand streaked their faces. Halfway through, one recruit stumbled. The log tilted dangerously. "Rotate out," she called. "Hoffman, switch with me now." They hesitated. She was 52, half their strength, surely not serious. "Now." They obeyed. She took the forward position, the worst of them all, where the weight cut deep into bone. Her body bent slightly but didn't break. She used her stance, her hips, and leverage instead of brute power. When they finished the distance, they hadn't dropped the log once. Hoffman looked at her, chest heaving. "Ma'am, how the hell?" "Biomechanics," she said, smiling faintly. "And 40 years of doing the hard way the right way." The rope climbs came next. 30 feet straight up, no harness, no safety net. You fall, you start over. The young men attacked the ropes like warriors, raw power, arms burning, legs flailing. Margaret moved differently. She wrapped the rope between her boots, used her legs as anchors, pulled with minimal arm effort. Her climb was slower but steady. She reached the bell, rang it, and descended with fluid control. Brennan's stopwatch clicked. His expression, half disbelief, half reluctant respect, said more than words. By the time they hit the surf zone, the fog had lifted. The water looked like liquid steel. 40 degrees. Into the water. The ocean hit like a weapon. Men gasped, some cursed. Margaret didn't fight it. She moved with the tide, advanced when it receded, waited when it crashed. When she emerged from the breakers, she was side by side with the lead crew. Cross, watching from the shoreline, whispered, "My God, she's not just keeping up, she's teaching them." From the dunes above, the observers arrived, congressional aides in windbreakers, Pentagon analysts, and one man whose arrival turned heads. Rear Admiral Thomas Shepard, Deputy Commander of Naval Special Warfare. Beside him stood Colonel Garrett. The colonel's expression when he saw her was pure disbelief, then rage. "What the hell is she doing here?" Campbell, standing nearby, didn't flinch. "Participating as a civilian volunteer, sir. You hadn't provided written denial." "We're on a federal installation." "Technically," Campbell interrupted, "public access beach. She's conducting personal training. Coincidental timing." Garrett's mouth opened, but Admiral Shepard's voice cut through the tension. "Problem, Colonel?" Garrett forced a tight smile. "None, sir. Administrative misunderstanding." The Admiral's eyes shifted toward the beach, where Margaret was clearing another obstacle with Boat Crew 3. "That misunderstanding seems remarkably fit," he said. Garrett said nothing. An hour later, the obstacle course reached its final challenge, the 12-foot wall. By now, every candidate was soaked, sand-crusted muscles screaming. Margaret looked up at the wooden barrier. She was exhausted, but something burned hotter inside her, the image of her son's face, young, proud, and gone. She took 3 running steps, planted her foot halfway up, and vaulted. Her hands caught the top. Her legs walked the wall as if climbing herself into defiance. She rolled over the top and dropped down the far side, landing hard but upright. Behind her, Wells let out a stunned laugh. "Ma'am, you actually did it." She brushed sand from her arms, breathing steady. "So did you," she said. They crossed the finish line together. Congressional observers clapped politely. It wasn't part of the script, but they couldn't help it. One senator's aide turned to Campbell. "That psychologist, she's impressive. Proves her training isn't just talk." Campbell nodded once. "She proves that resilience isn't age or gender. It's technique, discipline, and purpose." From behind them, Garrett stepped forward. "Impressive, yes," he said tightly. "But this was a demonstration, not a competition. Physical ability doesn't replace chain of command." Campbell's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Garrett walked straight to her. "Quite the show, Doctor," he said under his breath. "Trying to turn this into a circus." "I didn't invite the audience," she replied softly. "You did." His eyes flared. "You're suspended. This stunt only reinforces my decision." "Then issue the order in writing, Colonel," she said. "Specify the grounds." "You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm not playing," she whispered. "You are, and you're losing." Before he could respond, Rear Admiral Shepard approached with Captain Elizabeth Monroe, the base's Judge Advocate General officer. "Colonel Garrett," Monroe said, "per protocol, the investigation into last night's incident has been elevated to official status. Multiple witness statements have been filed. You're relieved of command pending review." Garrett froze. "What?" "Commander Hughes assumes acting authority," Shepard added calmly. "Effective immediately." The words fell like a detonation. Relieved of command. In front of subordinates, civilians, and Congress. Garrett's face turned pale, then dark red. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Margaret stood a few feet away, sand and seawater streaking her arms, expression neutral. Not triumphant, just resolute. Shepard turned to her. "Dr. Dalton, that was a remarkable demonstration. I'd like a full briefing on your resilience curriculum this afternoon." "Of course, Admiral," she said. As they walked away, Garrett whispered through clenched teeth, "This isn't over." Margaret met his gaze. "For once, Colonel," she said quietly, "we agree." Later that afternoon, Balboa Naval Hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and ocean air. Dr. Rebecca Marshall, Navy psychiatrist, shuffled through files stacked like a defense wall around her desk. She was the kind of doctor who fought quietly, one case at a time, against an institution built to deny its own sickness. When Margaret entered, Marshall looked up. "Master Chief Campbell said you'd come. You're asking about suicide data among SEAL commands." Margaret nodded, specifically during Colonel Garrett's leadership tenures. Marshall hesitated, then opened a locked cabinet and pulled out several folders. 5 years of psychiatric consultations, she said, officially anonymized. Unofficially, she tapped the files. They tell a story no one wants to read. Margaret leaned in. Show me. The graphs were brutal. Suicide attempts, completions, untreated PTSD, substance abuse. The pattern was unmistakable. Units under Garrett's command showed double the suicide rate of comparable commands. How long have you known? Margaret asked quietly. Too long, Marshall said. Every time I've tried to escalate, reports vanish in review boards. They call it misinterpretation of data. It's not misinterpreted, Doctor, it's buried. Margaret's throat tightened. 17 suicides. 17 in 5 years, Marshall confirmed. Statistically, there should have been half that number. And it's not just numbers. These are names, faces, men I've counseled. The air between them turned heavy. I need your data, Margaret said. Properly anonymized. I need your testimony if this becomes official. Marshall studied her. You're preparing for war. No, Margaret said. I'm preparing for justice. Marshall slid the folders across the desk. Then you'll have it. The older woman paused, then added, one of my current patients, Petty Officer First Class Austin Reed, has been expressing suicidal thoughts. Command won't allow inpatient treatment. You might be the only person he'll talk to. Margaret nodded slowly. Then we start with him. That night, the Pacific wind rattled the windows of her small hotel room. Her laptop glowed in the dark, spreadsheets of data turning into a weapon of truth. Every suicide report, every ignored warning, every command climate review. Each number was a name. Each name a son. She hit send. The email flew to the Inspector General, to the Navy Times, to the Congressional Oversight Office. Subject line, formal complaint, assault by Colonel James Garrett and institutional negligence in operator suicides. She sat back and stared at the black water beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, men were training in the cold. Somewhere out there, her son's memory still walked beside them. This is for you, David, she whispered, and for every warrior the system failed. The ocean didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Because by morning, the entire institution would. How do you save a soldier who's already given up on being saved? Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cross had been asking himself that question for weeks, but tonight, standing on the quiet dock behind the boathouse, he finally saw the answer staring back at him. Petty Officer First Class Austin Reed sat alone at the edge of the pier, boots dangling over black water that reflected the faint orange of the base floodlights. His hands were clasped loosely, like he didn't trust them not to tremble. Reed, Cross said softly, approaching. Missed evening formation. Reed didn't turn. Sorry, sir, lost track of time. You've been losing track of a lot lately. Cross sat beside him, leaving a foot of respectful silence between them. You want to tell me what's going on? Reed gave a dry laugh, the kind that isn't humor at all, just exhaustion shaped into sound. Nothing's going on, just tired. Cross studied him quietly. 8 years of service, 3 deployments, a chest full of commendations. The kind of SEAL who could handle any mission except the one inside his own head. Cross had seen that look before, the 1,000-yard stare that didn't come from distance, but from memory. What won't stop? Cross asked. The loop, Reed said after a long pause. The moment, over and over, I can't shut it off. He rubbed the back of his neck, like trying to erase the memory physically. Mogadishu, secondary IAD. I missed the indicator. 3 of my team got hit because I didn't see it. You were cleared in the AAR, Cross reminded him. That device was buried under concrete. No one could have. Doesn't matter, Reed interrupted. His voice cracked not from volume but weight. They almost died because I failed. Cross took a slow breath. You've been seeing Dr. Marshall. When command lets me, Reed snorted. You know how it is. You show up at medical too often, people start whispering. Can Reed still operate? Is he stable? Next thing you know, you're reassigned to a desk or medicaled out. The bitterness in his tone wasn't anger. It was hopelessness dressed up as defiance. Seeking help isn't weakness, Cross said carefully. Tell that to the promotion board, Reed muttered. Tell it to the guys who get pulled from ops for talking about nightmares. He went quiet. The wind pushed against the dock, the water below knocking gently against the pylons like a ticking clock. Cross leaned forward, elbows on knees. You thinking about ending it? Reed didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the reflection of the floodlight in the water, a trembling white circle that never stayed still. Sometimes, he said finally, sometimes it feels like the only way to make the loop stop. The words hit Cross like cold water. He'd lost teammates before, in firefights, in accidents, in the quiet aftermath when no one was looking. But hearing it like this, from someone still alive, still reachable, it felt like standing on the edge of a minefield, knowing one wrong step meant permanent silence. Listen to me, Cross said, voice low but firm. You are not alone in this. I know it feels that way, but you're not. What's happening to you, it's treatable. It gets better, but you have to give the process a chance. Reed laughed again, empty. The process. The same one that ruined Petty Officer Lang's career after he told a doc he couldn't sleep. He's running security gates now, sir. Not exactly a success story. Cross's hands tightened. He hated that Reed wasn't wrong. The system that created elite warriors also destroyed them the moment they admitted imperfection. There's someone you should meet, Cross said finally. Dr. Margaret Dalton. The lady the colonel grabbed at the officers' club, Reed asked, glancing at him for the first time. The same, she's been where you are. Her son was a SEAL, died by suicide after his deployment. She gets it more than anyone I've met in this command. She's the one causing all the noise about leadership accountability. She's the one telling the truth, Cross said, and you need the truth right now more than you need your pride. Reed stared at him, jaw tight. Talking to her won't change what happened. No, Cross admitted, but staying silent guarantees nothing will. He stood, promise me something, 24 hours. Don't make any permanent decisions before giving help a real chance. Reed didn't move for a long time. Then quietly, 24 hours. That's all I need, Cross said. Now come on, we're going to Balboa. Dr. Marshall's waiting. Balboa Naval Hospital sat like a white fortress against the San Diego skyline. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over polished floors and hallways that smelled of sterile exhaustion. In a small consultation room, Dr. Margaret Dalton waited. She'd been there before, not this exact room, but others like it. Same quiet hum, same faint antiseptic scent. It had been 3 years ago, different patient, her son. When Reed walked in, she saw it instantly, the same posture of a man holding himself together with brittle willpower. The same eyes that looked everywhere except the person trying to help. He sat across from her, shoulders hunched. Commander Cross said you wanted to talk. I did, she said softly, but only if you want to. He shrugged, not sure what's left to say. Then maybe you start with what you can't stop thinking about. His jaw clenched, Mogadishu. And so he told her about the IED, about the flash, about the screams that still echoed when he closed his eyes. He spoke in fragments, like pieces of shrapnel being pulled one by one. She didn't interrupt, didn't take notes, just listened. When he finally fell silent, she said quietly, You know, my son said almost the same words you just did. He thought one mistake defined him forever. Reed looked up startled. You lost your son. She nodded. Lieutenant David Dalton, SEAL Team 7, 3 years ago. He reached out for help. The system looked away. Reed swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she said gently. Be determined to live differently than he did. You're here. That's courage, Austin, real courage. Doesn't feel like courage. Of course not, she said. Courage never does in the moment. He gave a broken laugh, shaking his head. You make it sound easy. Nothing about this is easy, she said. But it's necessary. What you're feeling, guilt, replay, isolation, it's your mind trying to process trauma without enough air. We're going to give it air again. He blinked, unsure whether to believe her. You're not broken, she continued. You're injured, and injuries heal when they're treated. He was quiet for a long time, then said, If I do this, if I start treatment, it'll kill my career. She leaned forward. Your career means nothing if you're dead, Austin. The words landed like an anchor. He closed his eyes, jaw trembling. I don't want to be weak. She smiled faintly. Neither did my son, and he was, but the system convinced him that being human was weakness. It's a lie, one we're going to expose together. For the first time that night, his shoulders dropped. Not relaxed, just released. The kind of drop that comes when someone realizes they don't have to carry everything alone. Thank you, he whispered. You don't have to thank me, she said. Just stay alive. Across the city, inside a temporary command trailer, Colonel Garrett was packing like a trapped animal. The walls were plastered with 30 years of commendations, unit photographs, and plaques, fragments of a career now slipping through his fingers. Commander Gregory Stone from JAG sat across from him, eyes scanning files spread across the table. Sir, the evidence isn't good. Multiple officers corroborated Dr. Dalton's account. The assault alone could end your career. Garrett stopped packing. Assault? That woman provoked me. She insulted the command, used her son's death as leverage. I simply grabbed her by the hair in front of 60 witnesses, Stone finished. That's not simply, Colonel. That's grounds for relief and potentially criminal charges. Garrett's eyes were cold steel. She's emotionally unstable. We spin it that way. Traumatized mother lashing out. Everyone will buy it. Maybe, Stone said, if there weren't suicide statistics linked directly to your commands. The colonel froze. What statistics? Stone exhaled. Dr. Dalton and Dr. Rebecca Marshall compiled 5 years of data showing significantly elevated suicide rates among your units. NCIS is already expanding the inquiry. They're calling it possible negligent homicide. Garrett's face drained of color. That's absurd. They have medical warnings ignored, treatment requests denied, and emails from psychiatrists advising intervention that you dismissed. Shepard won't let this stick, Garrett said, more to himself than anyone else. He knows the score. Admiral Shepard already approved the investigation, Stone replied. He's cooperating fully. Garrett's hands tightened into fists. Then we destroy Dalton's credibility, paint her as vengeful, emotional, irrational. We remind everyone she lost a son and is projecting blame. Sir, that's not a legal defense. That's character assassination. Then so be it, Garrett snapped. This is war. Stone closed the file slowly. If you keep thinking like that, Colonel, you're going to lose more than a war. You're going to lose your name. But Garrett didn't hear him. He was staring at a photograph on the wall, his old platoon, Iraq 2005. In the back row, half shadowed by the sun, a young Lieutenant David Dalton smiled at the camera. For the first time in years, the colonel looked uncertain. Back at the hospital, Margaret left the consultation room and walked the empty hallway, the night pressing heavy around her. Every step echoed like a heartbeat, steady, defiant. She paused at a window overlooking the sleeping city. The ocean beyond glimmered under a sliver of moonlight. Cross joined her a moment later, voice low. How's Reed? Still standing, she said. For now, that's enough. He trusts you. He shouldn't, she said softly. He should trust the system, but it broke that trust long before I arrived. Cross nodded. Garrett's finished, the investigation out of his hands now. Finished, she repeated quietly. Men like him never think they're finished. They think they're untouchable until someone proves otherwise. Cross looked at her. You're that someone. She didn't answer. She just looked out at the Pacific, vast, cold, unending, and whispered to herself. No, I'm just the first one who stopped being afraid to tell the truth. The first sign came on Monday morning. Her clearance badge didn't work. She tried the scanner twice, then a third time. The red light blinked with mechanical indifference. The young security petty officer at the gate, barely 20, looked apologetic. Ma'am, it's showing inactive. Inactive, she asked. Since when? He scrolled through his tablet. Says deactivated by order of command. Which command? He hesitated. Classified source. Sorry, ma'am. She stared at him, then exhaled slowly. Not your fault, sailor. It wasn't the inconvenience that stung. It was the message. She was being erased, quietly, efficiently. Inside Building 170, NCIS Special Agent Lucas hand-dropped a folder onto his desk and rubbed his temples. He'd been in the field long enough to know when something smelled wrong, and this case reeked. Across from him, his partner, Special Agent Tessa Morales, scanned the same file. 17 suicides under one commander, she muttered. That's not a pattern, that's a crisis. Add an assault allegation, missing mental health reports and tampered data logs, Hand said. We're either looking at negligence or something worse. Suppression, Morales said. Institutional cover-up. He nodded grimly, the kind that starts at the top. She looked at the last page, a photo of Colonel James Garrett shaking hands with Admiral Shepard during a change-of-command ceremony. If Garrett goes down, the fallout will hit everyone who ever vouched for him. Hand sighed, which is exactly why they'll try to bury it before it reaches daylight. He tapped the table. We need Dr. Dalton's statement official recorded before they silence her too. Margaret sat alone in her hotel room, laptop open, reading the email she wasn't supposed to see. It had been forwarded accidentally, or maybe providentially, by a clerk in the medical division. Subject urgent Ray, Dalton inquiry. From Office of Legal Counsel. To Commander Gregory Stone, JAG. Recommend immediate termination of Dr. Dalton's contract. Justify under Section 4, loss of institutional confidence. Must proceed formal NCIS interview to prevent testimonial complications. She leaned back, staring at the screen. They weren't just trying to silence her. They were trying to make her disappear before she could testify. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Dr. Dalton. The voice was clipped official. This is Special Agent Han, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We need to meet discreetly. You're being targeted for suppression. She exhaled slowly. When and where? They met at dusk in a quiet cafe across from Balboa Park. Han wore plain clothes, jeans, a gray windbreaker. Morales sat at a nearby table pretending to read. Your badge deactivated, he asked as soon as she sat down. Yes. Expected, he said. Colonel Garrett's legal counsel is moving fast. They're framing you as emotionally unstable due to personal trauma. Her lips twitched, not a smile, not quite anger either. They're using my son's death against me. Han nodded grimly. It's an old playbook. Discredit the accuser, protect the institution. She leaned forward. Then stop them. You have the data, the witnesses, the reports. Not enough, he said. Half the documentation Dr. Marshall gave you is now classified. Internal logs were wiped last night. Margaret froze, wiped. Encrypted server purge, Han explained. Triggered automatically by a flag order. Only a flag officer could authorize it. Her stomach sank. Shepard. Han hesitated. We can't confirm that, but whoever did it wants this case to vanish before the Inspector General sees it. So what now? She asked. Han looked at her, tone measured. We build it back, Off the record, every testimony we can get. Survivors, families, medical officers, anyone. She nodded slowly. Then we start tonight. Back on base, Cross was standing on the pier when two unmarked SUVs rolled through the checkpoint. He recognized the men inside instantly. Command Investigations Division, the Navy's internal cleanup crew. They didn't look for evidence, they controlled it. Cross's phone buzzed. "Margaret, they're coming for me." He typed fast, "Stay where you are, I'll get you off base." A pause, then, "No, I'm done running." He closed his eyes. He should have known she'd say that. At 2200 hours, Margaret drove herself back to the base hospital. The parking lot was half empty, shadows stretching across the asphalt. Dr. Marshall was waiting by the side door holding a flash drive. "Everything I could recover before the purge," she whispered. "It's not much, partial case notes, anonymized files, but enough to show a pattern." "Back up it twice," Margaret said. "Cloud, offline, personal copy." Marshall hesitated. "You sure about this? Once this goes public, they'll destroy your career." Margaret smiled faintly. "You think I still have a career?" They shared a look. Two women who had already decided that survival meant something different now. At 23:30, three black SUVs pulled into the lot. Security lights flicked on, harsh white cutting across the dark. Margaret and Marshall froze. "Inside," Marshall hissed. They slipped into the corridor just as heavy boots echoed behind them. "Dr. Dalton," a voice barked. "Naval Security Command, step out and surrender your credentials." They ran. Down sterile halls, past patient rooms, through the back emergency exit into the night air. An alarm began to wail. They reached Marshall's car, breathless. Margaret yanked the passenger door open. "Drive," she said. As the sedan roared out of the parking lot, Marshall's hands shook on the wheel. "What are we doing?" Margaret looked out the window at the base disappearing behind them, finishing what we started. By morning, news broke like a controlled explosion. Navy psychologist ALLEGES cover-up in SEAL suicide crisis. The Navy Times headline spread across social media, leaked from an anonymous email address traced to no known source. Inside the attached files, excerpts from Dalton's data, whistleblower testimony, and photographs of Garrett at multiple commands. The institution went into lockdown, public affairs scrambled, calls flooded Capitol Hill. Garrett's lawyer called him at 500. "Damage control's impossible, sir. Congress wants oversight hearings. You're being subpoenaed." Garrett's hands trembled as he poured whiskey into his coffee mug. "Then we burn her down before she gets there." At 800, Margaret sat across from Agent Han in a small NCIS safe office. The blinds were drawn. The tension was a living thing. "You leaked it," he said quietly. "I leaked the truth," she corrected. "You realize that complicates the case. Chain of custody, admissibility." "Chain of custody didn't protect the dead," she snapped. "It protected the ones who let them die." Han exhaled. "You've made yourself a target. You're under surveillance now." She gave a small, tired smile. "Good. Maybe someone will finally listen." He stared at her and for the first time understood she wasn't reckless. She was resigned. "You're not afraid?" he asked. "I've already lost the only thing fear could take from me," she said softly. That afternoon, in a secure wing of the Pentagon, Admiral Shepard faced the mirror in his private office. He looked older than he had the week before. Sleeplessness had carved deep lines into his face. A knock. Garrett entered, uniform immaculate, expression poisonous. "You sold me out," Garrett said. Shepard didn't turn. "You sold yourself out the moment you touched her. She's destroying the command, Thomas. You know what happens if Congress starts sniffing around? Funding cuts, oversight boards, career suicides." "She's revealing the cost of silence," Shepard said. And if that costs us funding, so be it. Garrett's jaw clenched. You used to believe in loyalty. I still do, Shepard said quietly, but not at the cost of humanity. He turned then, eyes like winter. You buried reports. You ignored warnings. You turned command into a machine that devoured the broken and called it discipline. I won't defend that. For a moment neither spoke. Then Garrett's voice dropped, almost trembling. You think I wanted any of this? You think I didn't see the cracks? You think I did? He stopped, swallowed hard. I tried to keep them strong, that's all. By making them afraid to be human, Shepard said. You mistook fear for strength. Garrett's mask cracked, not much, but enough to reveal a man who once meant well, and got lost somewhere between duty and ego. You'll regret this, Garrett said, when the press turns on you, when Congress turns on you. Shepard just looked at him. Sometimes, he said, the only way to save an institution is to let it feel shame. That night, Margaret visited Austin Reed again. He was sitting in the hospital garden, under the same stars her son used to stare at from deployment camps. He looked better, tired but alive. I saw the article, he said softly. You did it. She smiled faintly. We did it, you spoke. Dr. Marshall risked her career, hand protected us. None of this happens alone. He nodded. I don't know how this ends. Neither do I, she said. But for the first time, the silence isn't winning. He looked at her, then at the sky. Do you ever think they'll change? She thought of Garrett, of Shepard, of the endless chain of men who taught obedience over empathy. Eventually, she said quietly, when the cost of not changing becomes unbearable. He exhaled, eyes glinting with reflection. Feels like it already is. Margaret smiled, small, weary, real. Then maybe that's where change begins. The night breeze shifted, carrying the faint smell of salt and jet fuel. Somewhere out over the bay, aircraft lights blinked like constellations in motion. For the first time in years, she felt something almost foreign in her chest. Not victory, not peace. Hope. But hope had its price. Across the city, a man watched her from a dark sedan parked under a streetlight. He wore civilian clothes, a headset tucked behind his ear. Target has returned to residence, he said quietly. A voice crackled through his earpiece. Maintain visual, orders pending. The man nodded, started the engine and waited. The game wasn't over, it was just shifting. What happens when the truth becomes a threat? By sunrise, Dr. Margaret Dalton realized she was no longer fighting a system, she was surviving one. Her hotel room phone rang at 4:13 a.m. Once, twice, 3 times. She picked up on the 4th ring. No one spoke, just a breath, slow, deliberate. Then the line went dead. She sat still for a moment, heart hammering in her chest. The glow of the city bled through the blinds. Outside, somewhere down the block, a car engine idled for too long before fading away. Margaret didn't scare easily, not anymore, but this wasn't random. She reached for her phone and called Master Chief Campbell. He answered on the first ring. Doc. They're watching me. I know, he said quietly. Han told me to keep you off base for 72 hours. They're combing your background looking for leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that ruins reputations. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Let them dig, there's nothing to find. Campbell paused. Everyone has something, Doc, even if it's just how they spin it. At 900, she met Han and Morales at a rented office space downtown, neutral ground. The kind of place used by reporters or whistleblowers before stories broke open. Han slid a printed memo across the table. It was stamped confidential, internal AFFAIRS. Subject: preliminary findings, Dalton allegations. Finding: Dr. Dalton exhibits signs of emotional instability and bias. Sources cite erratic behavior, fixation on deceased son, and refusal to cooperate with command structure. She skimmed it, her throat went dry. "Signed by who?" she asked. "Commander Gregory Stone," Han said. "JAG Division." "The same officer advising Garrett," Morales added. "They're building a narrative you're unfit, irrational, compromised by grief." Margaret laughed softly, though nothing about it was funny. "So that's the story. Angry mother loses her mind." "They'll leak it to the press," Han said, "soon as the hearing date's set." She leaned back thinking, "Then we go first." Morales frowned, meaning. "We go public again, this time with the families. The men who died under Garrett's command. Their voices make mine undeniable." Han rubbed his forehead. "You're escalating a war with an organization that has an unlimited media arm." Margaret met his eyes. "They already declared war the moment they buried the truth. I'm just making sure it doesn't stay buried." Later that day, she met with the first family, the Langs, parents of Petty Officer Michael Lang. Their house sat on a quiet street outside Coronado, the kind of neighborhood where flags flew on porches and grief lived behind drawn curtains. Mrs. Lang opened the door with tired eyes and a cautious smile. "You're Dr. Dalton." "Yes, ma'am. I knew your son's case. I wanted to talk about his time under Colonel Garrett." The woman's lip trembled. "You mean before the Navy said he was just depressed?" Margaret nodded gently. "He reached out for help, didn't he?" Her husband appeared behind her, eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "He did, 3 times. Medical said they'd review his readiness status. 2 weeks later he was gone. They sent us a flag and a letter." Margaret swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry." Mrs. Lang led her inside. The living room smelled of coffee and memory. Photographs lined the mantel: Michael in uniform, Michael fishing, Michael smiling at a graduation ceremony. "We tried talking to the Navy," the mother said. "They told us not to pursue it, said it would tarnish his legacy." "Tarnish," Margaret repeated quietly, "for wanting help." The father sat forward. "You think that colonel had something to do with it?" "I think he created a culture where asking for help was punished," she said, "and I intend to prove it." The old man nodded. "Then you have our statement. Use our name, use his picture, whatever it takes." Margaret exhaled slowly. "Thank you. You have no idea how much that matters." Mrs. Lang touched her hand. "Just make sure they remember him as a man, not a number." Margaret met her gaze. "I promise." By week's end, she'd spoken to 7 families. Every story echoed the same tragedy: silence, shame, bureaucracy. Each voice built the case stronger, but it also painted a target larger. Her email filled with anonymous threats. Her car tires were slashed outside her hotel. One night, someone followed her through the parking garage until she turned around and faced them. They stopped, a shadow in a hoodie, then walked away. She didn't chase them. She just whispered, cowered, into the empty air and went inside. Meanwhile, Colonel Garrett was unraveling. He sat in his temporary quarters, surrounded by unopened mail and half-empty bottles. His reflection in the mirror didn't look like a commander anymore. He'd lost weight. His hands trembled when he poured coffee. A knock came at the door. "Enter," he said. Commander Stone stepped in, carrying a folder. "Congressional Oversight wants testimony next week. You'll be under oath." Garrett sneered. "So will she." "Sir, you need to tread carefully. The narrative's shifting. That video of her on the beach during Hell Week went viral. People are calling her the Iron Widow." Garrett slammed his fist on the table. "A nickname doesn't make her credible." "Maybe not," Stone said, "but it makes her unstoppable." Garrett glared at him. "Then we find something, anything, discredit her before she walks into that hearing." He pointed at Stone. "You have clearance to dig into her past. Old deployments, medical records, anything we can spin." "Understood," Stone said, but something in his eyes flickered. Doubt. As he left, Garrett called after him, And Stone, remember who built this command. Loyalty still matters. The door closed. For a long time, Garrett stared at the wall where his medals hung. Then slowly he reached for a photograph, the one from Iraq 2005. David Dalton, her son, smiling beside him. Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. "What did I do to you, kid?" 3 nights later, Margaret received another call. This one wasn't anonymous. "Austin Reed," she said, recognizing the voice. "Doc, I messed up," he said, breathless. "They're transferring me." "What, why?" "Command found out I spoke to NCIS. Said I violated confidentiality and compromised team integrity. They're pulling my security clearance." Her pulse spiked. "Where are you now?" "Base barracks. They're taking me off deployment status tomorrow. I can't do this again. I can't." "Austin, listen to me," she said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. You told the truth. I'll handle this, but you need to stay calm." Silence, then a whisper. "They're making me feel like I betrayed everyone." "You didn't betray them," she said. "You protected them." But the line had already gone dead. By dawn, she was back at the base gate, arguing with security. "My badge is still inactive, ma'am," the petty officer said apologetically. "Then call Master Chief Campbell," she ordered. "Tell him Dr. Dalton's here on urgent medical business." 10 minutes later, Campbell arrived in a jeep, eyes sharp but tired. "What's wrong?" "Austin Reed. They're retaliating. He's at risk." Campbell didn't ask for proof. He didn't need any. "Get in." They drove to the barracks. Reed's room was empty, his gear gone. Campbell checked the duty roster. They transferred him to Pendleton already. Administrative reassignment. That's code for quiet removal. Margaret clenched her fists. "They're silencing him." "Then we don't let them," Campbell said. "We find him before they do." They drove north, 2 hours, rain sweeping across the windshield. When they reached Camp Pendleton, a corporal at the gate checked their IDs and frowned. "Sorry, ma'am, no civilians allowed in without clearance." Campbell leaned over. "You tell your co that Master Chief Frank Campbell of Naval Special Warfare needs 5 minutes with Petty Officer Reed. Now." The corporal blinked, then saluted and made the call. 10 minutes later, Reed appeared. His uniform was half-packed duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes looked hollow. "Doc," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she said. "Come with us." "I can't. They told me if I leave base, it's AWOL." "You're being manipulated," Campbell said. "This isn't protocol, it's punishment." Reed's jaw clenched. "I can't fight the Navy." Margaret stepped closer. "You don't have to fight it, just survive it. I'll handle the rest." He hesitated, then whispered, "They said I'd lose my pension." "I'll make sure you don't lose your life," she said. He looked at her, then nodded once, small but real. By that evening, Margaret had sent Reed's testimony directly to Han and Morales. Video recorded, date stamped and backed up. Han's text came 5 minutes later. "Got it. You just gave us probable cause for obstruction." She smiled faintly. Then the lights in her hotel room flickered. Once, twice. Then died completely. She reached for her phone, dead battery. The hallway outside was silent, too silent. From somewhere below, an engine started. Then stopped. Her breath caught. She crossed to the window, parked on the curb a dark sedan. 2 silhouettes inside, watching. She didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared back until the car pulled away. Then she whispered, "You can watch all you want, I'm not stopping." She turned back toward the desk, opened her laptop, and began typing her next report. Each word felt heavier than the last, but she kept going because somewhere out there, one soldier, one mother, one truth still needed her too. That night she dreamed of David. He was standing on a beach at dawn, the horizon behind him painted gold. He smiled, that same boyish grin that used to light up their kitchen. "Mom," he said, voice soft but clear, "keep going." She woke with tears on her face and her hand clutching the necklace she hadn't taken off in 3 years. His dog tag, worn smooth by grief. "Always," she whispered. "What happens when telling the truth puts your life in danger?" By the time the sun rose, Dr. Margaret Dalton already knew the answer. It wasn't fear that woke her, it was instinct. That quiet hum in the bones that soldiers and mothers alike learn to trust. She opened her eyes to the faint sound of glass breaking. Somewhere downstairs. The clock read 4:27 a.m. Her breath caught. The room was dark, except for the silver outline of moonlight slipping through the curtains. She moved silently, barefoot across the carpet, hand reaching for the small flashlight in her bag. When she flicked it on, it painted the room in thin white light. Nothing seemed disturbed, until she noticed the faint breeze brushing her ankle. The window, it was open. She froze. Someone had been inside. 10 minutes later, police lights flickered red and blue against the walls of her hotel room. The responding officer, a young lieutenant barely out of academy, took her statement with shaking hands. "Nothing stolen," he said, "just the window latch broken." "It wasn't a robbery," Margaret said. He frowned. "Then what was it, ma'am?" "A message," she whispered. The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then nodded uneasily. "We'll file a report. You might want to consider relocating, Dr. Dalton." She almost laughed. Relocating, exactly what they want. When Han arrived, his expression said everything words didn't. "They're escalating," he muttered, inspecting the window frame. "First surveillance, now intimidation. They're trying to rattle you." Margaret sat on the bed, exhausted but steady. "Then they're wasting their time." "Are they?" he asked softly. "Because intimidation doesn't work on the strong, but exhaustion does. You haven't slept, haven't eaten, and you're still trying to carry this fight alone." She looked up at him. "You think I'm doing this for me?" "I think you're doing it for a ghost," he said gently. She didn't answer. Han sighed. "We've traced the black sedan. Belongs to a private security firm contracted by a defense subcontractor, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Garrett's pulling private assets now." "Looks like it." Margaret stood. "Then I'm close." Han frowned. "Close to what?" "The truth that scares them enough to break into my room." That afternoon, she met with Master Chief Campbell at a small diner near the base. He looked older, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from moral fatigue. "They raided my office this morning," he said quietly. "Took every file connected to your program. Said it was chain of custody reassignment." "Garrett." "His proxies," Campbell said. "Even suspended, he's got loyalists, people who still think exposing him means betraying the Brotherhood." Margaret shook her head. "The Brotherhood's already betrayed itself." Campbell leaned closer. "You need to understand something. There are men out there who think keeping this quiet is the mission. They'll protect the command before they protect the truth. If they think you're threatening that." He trailed off. "I know," she said softly. "They'll make sure I don't finish." He met her eyes. "Then promise me something. Don't be alone tonight." She smiled faintly. "You offering to babysit me, Chief?" "I'm offering to make sure the right person tells your story if you can't." Her smile faded. "I'll be fine." He didn't look convinced. Meanwhile at the Pentagon, a storm was brewing behind closed doors. Admiral Thomas Shepard sat across from the Navy's top legal counsel and the Secretary of Defense. The hearing was days away, the pressure immense. "She's testifying under oath," the Secretary said. "If her data checks out, we'll have congressional oversight all over this. We can't afford another scandal." Shepard's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we face it. The data's real. The command climate has been toxic for years. If we hide it now, we lose more than reputation, we lose credibility. The secretary glared. You think the public cares about nuance? They'll see the words Navy, cover-up, and suicide, and that's all it takes. She's not the problem, Shepard said. She's the consequence. 2 days later, Margaret boarded a flight to D.C. She wore civilian clothes, no insignia, no rank, just a heart that had been tempered in grief and purpose. She landed under gray skies and rain that smelled of old marble and power. Outside the terminal, Han met her with morals in an unmarked sedan. Congressional committee hearing in 2 days, Han said. They'll grill you, discredit you, and try to shake you. Don't take the bait. She stared out the window as the city rolled past, monuments, flags, shadows of history. Let them try, she murmured. I'm done being quiet. That night, alone in a D.C. hotel room, she opened her laptop to rehearse her testimony. I'm not here to condemn the Navy. I'm here to save it from itself. She paused, fingers trembling slightly. My son served under Colonel Garrett. He believed loyalty meant silence. He believed weakness was a sin. That belief killed him. I'm here because I can't bury any more sons. Her voice caught on the last line. She wiped a tear and whispered to herself, Don't break on camera, Margaret, not there. Across town, Garrett sat in a dark office, eyes hollow. Commander Stone entered quietly, holding a flash drive. You asked for dirt, Stone said. I found something. Garrett looked up. What? Her old therapy notes, from after her son's death. She was treated for depression and acute stress. Garrett took the drive, smirking faintly. That's it, that's what I needed. Sir, Stone said carefully, if you use that, you're not fighting for truth anymore. You're just destroying a woman. Garrett looked at him, eyes cold. If I go down, I'm not going alone. Stone hesitated. Maybe that's the point. Garrett's expression flickered, confusion, maybe guilt, but it vanished. You're dismissed, Commander. The next day, as she walked out of her hotel lobby, Margaret noticed the same sedan parked across the street. Engine off, windows tinted. She felt it before she saw it, that low hum of danger again. Han had warned her not to be alone, but she refused to live afraid. She walked to the crosswalk, pretending not to notice. The sedan's engine turned over. She stepped into the street, and that's when it happened. A second car screeched from the corner, accelerating straight toward her. The world slowed, tires screamed, horns blared. She dove sideways. The impact missed her by inches. The car slammed into a light pole and sped away, metal shrieking. People screamed. Someone shouted, "Call 911." Margaret pushed herself up, shaking. Knees scraped, palms bleeding, alive. She looked down the street, watching the tail lights vanish. It hadn't been an accident. 2 hours later, Han stormed into George Washington University Hospital. She's lucky to be alive, the nurse said as he entered the trauma bay. Margaret sat on the bed, arm bandaged, face pale but calm. Han stopped at the foot of the bed. You okay? She gave a weak smile. I've been through worse. That wasn't a warning anymore, he said. That was an attempt. She nodded. Then we're closer than ever. He exhaled sharply. You can't keep thinking like that. You're not invincible. I'm not, she said softly, but the truth is. Han looked at her, and for the first time didn't try to argue. The next morning, the hearing room filled with cameras and press. Rows of uniforms and suits lined the benches. Colonel Garrett sat at the defense table, expression stoic but strained. His lawyer whispered something, but his hands betrayed him, shaking slightly, tucked under the table. When the clerk called her name, Margaret walked to the witness chair. Every step echoed in the silence. She raised her hand, swore the oath, sat down. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. My name is Dr. Margaret Dalton. I served as a clinical psychologist for the Marine Corps and later as a consultant for naval special warfare. I am here today because silence is killing our soldiers faster than war ever has. The committee chair leaned forward. Dr. Dalton, are you suggesting a systemic failure in the Navy's mental health infrastructure? Yes, she said, a failure of culture, a belief that admitting pain makes a warrior weak. That belief is wrong, and it's killing them. Murmurs rippled through the room. She continued, voice unwavering. My son, Lieutenant David Dalton, believed asking for help would cost him respect. It cost him his life. I will not let his death be another statistic in a report no one reads. One senator leaned in. Dr. Dalton, Colonel Garrett has accused you of bias and emotional instability, citing your own therapy records. How do you respond? Margaret paused, the air tightened, cameras zoomed. I respond, she said quietly, by saying he's right. I was broken. I grieved. I sought help. Because that's what strength looks like. The only shame I carry is that my son didn't believe he was allowed to do the same. A hush fell over the room. Even Garrett looked down. She went on, softer now. This isn't about blame. It's about change. A culture that punishes vulnerability cannot build resilience. If we keep teaching warriors to hide their pain, we'll keep burying them in silence. When she finished, the room was silent. Then one clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire gallery was standing. Garrett stayed seated, staring at his hands. For the first time in decades, he had nothing to say. Later that night, Margaret walked alone along the reflecting pool outside the Capitol. The city lights shimmered in the still water, perfect and distorted all at once. Hen joined her quietly. You changed the conversation today. She smiled faintly. One hearing doesn't change the world. No, he said, but it exposes who's still afraid of it. She looked at her reflection, lined, tired, but no longer haunted. The truth hurts, she whispered, but silence kills. A block away, Garrett watched from a parked car. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. For years, he'd believed silence was strength. Now, for the first time, he wondered if it had only ever been cowardice. He started the engine, but didn't drive away. Instead, he whispered to himself, maybe she was right. What happens after the truth is finally spoken? For Dr. Margaret Dalton, the answer wasn't victory, it was silence. The kind that follows explosions. 2 days after the hearing, the Navy issued an official statement. It was clinical, cold, written in the language of damage control. The Department of the Navy is committed to the well-being of all service members. Allegations raised by Dr. Margaret Dalton will be reviewed by an independent commission. No further comment at this time. There were no apologies, no names. Just words. But words sometimes were enough to shift the tide. At Balboa Naval Hospital, screens glowed with the news. Orderlies paused in hallways, corpsmen whispered. For the first time, people were talking openly. Petty Officer Austin Reed watched from his hospital bed, bandaged wrist resting on a pillow. He'd been hospitalized after a panic attack triggered by his reassignment ordeal. When Margaret entered the room, his eyes brightened slightly. You did it, he said. No, she replied softly, we did it. He smiled weakly. They're saying you might have saved lives. I hope so, she said. I can live with that. He studied her face for a long time. You look tired, Doc. She laughed quietly. I am tired, but I'm still standing. That's what counts. He looked down at his hands. You think they'll actually change anything? She hesitated. Not all at once. Systems like this don't collapse overnight. They erode one truth at a time. Reed nodded slowly. Then I'll help however I can. Margaret smiled, small, proud, and fragile. You already did. Meanwhile, far away, Colonel James Garrett sat in his temporary quarters, alone. The television played the same headline on loop. Congressional inquiry expands after testimony by Navy psychologist. He turned it off. The silence hurt more. His service revolver lay on the table beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. 34 years of service, 2 wars, 4 commands. And now this. He picked up a photograph from the desk. His team in Iraq, 2005. David Dalton among them, young and fearless. For the first time, Garrett whispered his name. "David, I'm sorry." But the photograph didn't answer. It just stared back, a frozen reminder of everything he'd built his life upon and everything he'd destroyed in the process. He put the picture down, then picked up the gun. His finger hesitated on the trigger. A knock interrupted. He froze. Another knock, firmer this time. "Colonel Garrett," a voice said. "NCIS, open the door." He stared at the gun a moment longer, then set it down, exhaling. "Come in." 2 agents entered, Han and Morales. "Colonel," Han said calmly, "we have a warrant for your arrest. Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and misconduct resulting in wrongful death." Garrett gave a bitter laugh. "You really think you can prove all that?" "We already have," Morales said. 17 cases, paper trails, testimonies, and the family statements. It's over, sir." Garrett nodded slowly. "Over," he repeated. "You're right." He turned his wrists out voluntarily. "Let's not make it ugly," he said quietly. "I've done enough of that already." Handcuffed him gently, almost respectfully. As they let him out, Garrett glanced at the window, the dawn light spilling through blinds, painting everything in pale gold. For a brief moment he almost smiled. Not from relief, but from recognition. The truth had finally caught up. By noon, the headlines changed again. Colonel Garrett arrested. Navy opens criminal investigation. Cable networks replayed the footage from the hearing. Commentators argued. Analysts speculated. But beneath all the noise, something real had shifted. Across bases nationwide, commanders quietly began reviewing mental health protocols. Mandatory counseling no longer meant weakness. For the first time in decades, silence wasn't the default. And that was enough for now. Later that week, Margaret was invited to meet the Secretary of the Navy. The office was vast, adorned with flags, photos, and the faint smell of old leather. The secretary rose as she entered. "Dr. Dalton, thank you for coming." She nodded politely. "Thank you for having me." He gestured for her to sit. "You caused quite a stir." She smiled faintly. "That was the idea." He chuckled once, then grew serious. "The department owes you an apology and more. You've exposed failures we should have addressed long ago." "I don't want apologies," she said. "I want change." He nodded. "You'll have it. We're launching an independent task force on operator wellness, mental health access, and leadership accountability. I'd like you to lead it." She blinked, taken aback. "Lead it?" "Yes, you've earned the respect of Congress and the public. Frankly, we need your credibility." She sat quietly for a long moment. Then, "I'll do it on one condition." "Name it." "That the task force reports directly to Congress, not internal command. No more buried reports, no more vanished data." The secretary considered, then smiled. "You drive a hard bargain, Doctor." "I've buried harder things than bargains," she said softly. He nodded. "Then it's yours." That night, she visited the small chapel on base, the same one where her son's memorial plaque hung. The air was cool and still. Candles flickered in quiet defiance of the dark. She knelt before the plaque, fingertips brushing the engraved name. "Lieutenant David Dalton, Navy SEAL Team 7. Greater love hath no man." Her throat tightened. "You'd laugh at me right now, wouldn't you?" she whispered. "All this attention, all these headlines. You never liked when I talked too much." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But I did it. I told them the truth for you, for everyone." She paused, voice trembling. "I just wish you were here to see it." Behind her, footsteps echoed softly. Master Chief Campbell stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "I figured I'd find you here," he said quietly. She wiped her face and smiled faintly. "Old habits." He approached, eyes gentle. "You did good, Doc, damn good." She exhaled. "It doesn't feel good, it just feels heavy." "Change always does," he said, "but you carried it better than most." She looked up at the stained glass window, where light poured through in colors of blood and gold. "Sometimes I wonder if any of this matters," she said. "It matters," he said. "Every man who walks into a counselor's office tomorrow without fear, that's because of you." She smiled weakly. "That's not me, Chief. That's them choosing to live." He nodded. "You gave them permission." Outside, the wind carried the scent of ocean salt and jet fuel. The sound of training echoed faintly from the distance, shouts, engines, life continuing. Margaret stood beside Campbell, watching the horizon fade to dusk. "What now?" he asked. She thought about it. "Now I teach them what resilience really means." He smiled. "You gonna stick around the command?" She shook her head. "No, I've spent too long trying to fix a system from inside it. Time to rebuild from the outside." He extended his hand. "Then whatever you do next, don't lose that fire." She took his hand firmly. "Fire's the only thing they couldn't take." They stood there in silence for a moment, two soldiers of different wars, united by a shared truth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight, it's to feel. Weeks passed. The task force was announced publicly. Margaret's photo appeared beside the headline. Navy psychologist leads reform initiative following scandal. She read it once, then closed the laptop. This wasn't about fame. It was about redemption, not for herself, but for everyone who had suffered in silence. Across the ocean, in a forward operating base in Jordan, a group of SEALs sat watching the same news on a flickering television. One of them, a young lieutenant, turned to the others. "You guys see this? They're changing the mental health regs, mandatory debriefing after deployment, no penalties." Another snorted, "About time." The lieutenant nodded. "You know what they're calling it, the Dalton Protocol." The room went quiet. Then slowly one of the men said, "Guess she made them listen." Back in San Diego, Margaret sat on the same beach where it all began. The tide rolled in softly, touching her boots, pulling back again. She looked out over the horizon, the place her son had always loved most. For the first time in years, she wasn't haunted by the sound of waves. They didn't sound like loss anymore. They sounded like memory. Like home. She reached into her pocket and pulled out David's dog tag. "Your name everywhere now," she whispered, "but I think you'd rather it was." She smiled faintly. "Too bad, you're part of history now." She stood, brushed the sand off her hands, and turned to leave. Behind her, the ocean shimmered like polished steel. For a long time, she didn't look back. But somewhere far away in a military cell, Colonel Garrett sat on his bunk, no uniform, no medals, just a man alone with his past. He stared at a folded letter on the table, addressed in careful handwriting. Dr. Margaret Dalton. He'd written it 3 times before finally getting it right. He picked it up and read it once more before sealing it. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I understand now what I refuse to see. That strength isn't silence. It's owning the pain we cause and trying, however late, to atone for it. Your son was the kind of man I wanted to be. You made him that. I'm sorry for everything I took from you. For what it's worth, thank you for giving me back my humanity." He placed the letter in the outgoing mail bin, exhaled slowly, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in his life, Colonel James Garrett prayed. What does victory look like when the battle is for the soul? For Dr. Margaret Dalton, victory didn't come with applause or medals. It came in the silence, the kind that feels like peace, not punishment. 6 months later, the Pacific wind still carried the same salt and memory, but Coronado wasn't the same place anymore. The command had changed. The tone, the language, the way instructors spoke to candidates different. Not soft, just human. Hell Week still broke men. But now, when it did, someone was there to help them build again instead of leaving them in the dark. The Dalton Protocol had become more than a policy, it had become a promise. Mandatory psychological debriefs after every operation. Peer accountability networks. Confidential mental health access. And most importantly, a message printed in every SEAL readiness packet. Strength is not silence. Resilience is not denial. Warriors bleed, but they heal too. The line came directly from her congressional testimony. When she first saw it in print, she wept, not because of pride, but because it meant something her son never got to hear. Margaret's life had changed quietly. She moved into a small house overlooking the cliffs near La Jolla, far from the constant noise of the base. Mornings began with coffee and the sound of gulls. Nights ended with the ocean's rhythm steady, endless, forgiving. Sometimes she still woke before dawn, half expecting another call, another emergency. But then she'd remember the fight was over. At least the part that belonged to her. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain envelope, Navy seal in the corner. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I mistook fear for strength and obedience for leadership. I was wrong. I hope you can find peace in what you've built, because through you, maybe I will too. James Garrett. She sat for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the same box as her son's medals. Peace, she whispered, we'll see. 3 days later, she stood at the naval cemetery outside Point Loma, the Pacific stretching behind endless white headstones. A small service was being held, not for her son, not this time, but for another. Petty Officer Austin Reed. Alive, whole, standing tall beside his wife holding his newborn daughter. It was a christening service, a quiet gathering of friends and soldiers. When he saw her, his face broke into a grin. "Doc," he said, walking over, "didn't think you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss it," she said. He laughed softly. "Meet Anna Margaret Reed." She blinked. "You named her." He nodded. "After the person who gave me back my life." Her throat tightened. That's too much." He smiled. "No, ma'am, it's just right." She touched the baby's hand, tiny, warm, impossibly alive. "Take care of her," she whispered. "Always," he said. As the service ended, she stood apart for a moment, watching the ocean glint beyond the graves. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Her son was there in every life saved. In every name remembered. In every man who learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was survival. Later that evening, she returned to the beach where everything had started, where Garrett had humiliated her, where she'd made her silent vow. Now it was empty, except for the whisper of waves and the long shadow of sunset. She took off her shoes and walked into the surf. The cold water climbed around her ankles, then her calves, wrapping her in its familiar chill. She closed her eyes and listened. For the first time, the ocean didn't sound like grief. It sounded like forgiveness. She whispered into the wind, "I did it, David, you can rest now." But rest wasn't for her, not yet. She still traveled from base to base, from classroom to auditorium, speaking to young recruits who didn't yet understand that the hardest enemy to fight lives inside the mind. She told them her story, stripped of glory, full of truth. She told them about pain and silence and the cost of pretending. And when she saw one of them, usually the quiet ones, wipe away a tear or glance down to hide trembling hands, she knew it mattered. Every talk ended the same way. She'd stand tall, look out at the sea of uniforms and say, "You are not broken for feeling. You are not weak for asking. And if anyone tells you otherwise, tell them to call me." And they always clapped, not because of inspiration, but because they knew she meant it. In time, the Navy's investigation concluded. The findings were brutal but honest. Colonel James Garrett was dishonorably discharged. The command structure was overhauled. Several senior officers resigned quietly before the report went public. When Margaret read the final page, she didn't feel triumph. She just felt still. Justice doesn't heal grief. It just gives it a place to rest. Months passed. Then one day, an envelope arrived, this time from the Department of Defense. Inside was a medal, a civilian citation for extraordinary service to the United States Navy. It came with a short note from the secretary. "Your courage has redefined what service means. The Navy thanks you." She smiled faintly, then placed the medal beside her son. They belonged together. That evening, she walked down to the beach again. The horizon burned orange and gold, clouds lit like fire. Master Chief Campbell joined her, hands in his pockets, the wind ruffling his silver hair. "Still can't stay away from this place, huh?" he said. She laughed. "Some things pull you back no matter how far you go." He nodded toward the waves. "You ever think he's out there somewhere?" She looked at the horizon, eyes glinting with both ache and peace. "I don't think he ever left." Campbell smiled. "You know, Doc, I've seen a lot of leaders in my life. None of them could have done what you did." "I didn't lead," she said softly. "I just refused to stay silent." "Same thing," he said. They stood there until the sun sank beneath the water, and for once, neither spoke. Some moments don't need words. Back home that night, she sat at her desk and opened her journal, the same one she'd carried since her first deployment. She wrote only one line. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She closed the book and smiled. The next morning, as dawn broke, a new batch of SEAL candidates ran across the grinder. Their instructor, Senior Chief Brennan, shouted commands, but his voice carried a different tone now. When one of the recruits faltered under a log, Brennan didn't humiliate him. He knelt beside him. "Get up," he said quietly. "You're stronger than you think. Don't prove it to me, prove it to yourself." The young man nodded, lifted the log again, and kept moving. From the observation deck, Margaret watched silently. Brennan caught her eye and gave a small nod. She returned it, a gesture that said everything words couldn't. That night, the base held a memorial for fallen SEALs. Every name was read aloud. 17 of them belonged to men whose stories had built her crusade. As their names echoed into the night, Margaret felt each one settle inside her, not as pain but as purpose. When the ceremony ended, a young recruit approached her. He looked nervous, barely 20. "Dr. Dalton," he said. "Yes." "My brother served under Colonel Garrett. He didn't make it. I just wanted to say thank you for making sure people remember him as more than a mistake." She smiled gently. "He wasn't a mistake. He was a warrior who deserved better. We all do." The recruit nodded, tears shining in his eyes. Then he saluted her, crisp, perfect. Margaret returned it, hand trembling slightly. Later, she stood alone at the shoreline one last time. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the barracks, young voices, alive, unbroken. She closed her eyes and breathed deep. The fight was never really over. But for the first time, It no longer felt unwinnable. She reached into her pocket and let David's dog tag fall into the surf. The metal caught the light once before the waves took it. "Rest easy, son," she whispered. "I've got the watch." The water receded. The horizon glowed. And for the first time in years, Dr. Margaret Dalton smiled, not as a mother mourning her loss, but as a soldier who'd finally kept her promise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.